Here's how the Vatican profited from war and slavery. Throughout history, the Catholic Church amassed wealth and power. During conflicts and through the slave trade, the Vatican found ways to grow its influence. But how did a religious institution become so entangled in such dark practices? Let's unpack that. Chapter 1. The Crusades. Spiritual wars and material gains. The Crusades were launched with the promise of spiritual salvation, but they soon revealed a thirst for material wealth. The Church, guiding Christian knights on these holy wars, found itself amassing substantial riches. The land was the first and most obvious gain. Nobles heading to the Holy Land would donate their estates to the Church, hoping to secure a place in heaven. These vast tracts of land not only increased the Church's wealth, but also its political power. Economic exploitation followed swiftly. The Church exploited the resources of newly conquered territories, from crops to minerals. These assets filled the Vatican's coffers, making the institution even more formidable. The Crusades also solidified the Pope's authority. With this enhanced power, the Church could demand increased tithes and donations from its followers, further bolstering its finances. Trade routes captured during the Crusades, such as those in Jerusalem, opened new streams of income. The Church controlled these key trade routes, benefiting from the bustling commerce in strategic locations. Chapter 2. The Albigensian Crusade, suppressing heresy and seizing wealth. The Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars was as much about wealth as it was about religious purity. Declaring the Cathars heretics, the Church unleashed a brutal campaign in southern France. Confiscation of property was a primary tactic. The lands and assets of the Cathars and their sympathizers were seized, enriching the Church considerably. These seizures not only suppressed heresy, but also served as a lucrative strategy. Taxation on the newly conquered territories funneled more wealth into the Vatican's treasury. The Church imposed heavy taxes, ensuring a steady flow of income from the subdued regions. Feudal rights granted to the Church over these lands meant control over labor and produce. The Church extracted these resources, reinforcing its economic dominance in the region. Religious penalties added another layer of profit. Heretics were fined heavily, and their penances often involved payments to the Church. This blend of spiritual authority and financial gain painted a grim picture of religious exploitation. Chapter 3. The Spanish Inquisition. Fear and financial exploitation. The Spanish Inquisition, intended to root out heresy, became a financial goldmine for the Catholic Church. The fear it instilled was matched only by the wealth it generated. Seized assets from accused heretics swelled the Church's wealth. Properties and valuables of those found guilty were confiscated, often without due process, filling the Vatican's coffers. Bribes and fines were rampant. To avoid torture or execution, many accused heretics bribed officials or paid hefty fines. These payments further enriched the Church, making the Inquisition a profitable venture. Tribunal costs were another source of income. The accused had to bear the costs of their trials, including fees for the inquisitors. This system ensured that even the process of prosecution was financially beneficial for the Church. Estate transfers were the final nail in the coffin for many condemned heretics. Upon their execution, their estates often transferred directly to the Church, cementing its control over vast properties and resources. Chapter 4. The Conquest of the Americas. Spiritual conquest and material exploitation. The Catholic Church played a pivotal role in the colonization of the Americas, intertwining spiritual missions with material exploitation. The riches of the New World beckoned, and the Church was quick to seize the opportunity. Land grants from Spanish and Portuguese crowns were a major boon. The Church received extensive lands, which became the foundation of its wealth in the Americas. These grants were often in prime, resource-rich areas. The encomienda system allowed the Church to exploit indigenous labor. Native populations were forced to work on Church lands, producing crops and mining resources. This exploitation created significant wealth for the Church. Tithes and offerings from converted indigenous populations added to the Church's coffers. As natives were baptized, they were also required to pay tithes, providing a steady stream of income. Resource extraction, particularly of gold and silver, was a lucrative venture. The church's lands in Mexico and Peru were rich in these precious metals, and their extraction added enormously to the Vatican's wealth. Chapter 5. The Transatlantic Slave Trade: Moral Ambiguity and Material Gain. The Vatican's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade is a dark chapter in its history. This period revealed a moral ambiguity that allowed the Church to profit from human misery. Ecclesiastical sanctions, such as the papal bulls Dum Diversas and Romanus Pontifex, authorized the enslavement of non-Christians. These decrees provided a moral cover for the brutal trade, leading to significant profits. The Church owned slaves and benefited from their labor in its territories. Monasteries and missions used slave labor for agriculture and construction, reducing costs and increasing productivity. Investments in the slave trade, particularly in Portuguese and Spanish colonies, further enriched the Church. The Vatican profited from the sale and transport of enslaved Africans, becoming a stakeholder in this inhumane industry. Moral justifications for slavery provided by the Church helped perpetuate the trade. By framing slavery as a means of conversion and salvation, the Church ensured its continued involvement and profit from this horrific practice. Chapter 6. The 30 Years' War: Conflict and Church Profiteering. The 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict that ravaged Europe, also brought financial gains to the Vatican. The Church's involvement in the war was both strategic and profitable. War financing was a key element. The Church financed various factions, particularly Catholic forces, expecting returns through interest on loans. These financial transactions filled the Vatican's treasury, even as Europe burned. Land seizure during the war often led to territories falling under Church control. These lands were rich in resources and strategically important, enhancing the Church's power and wealth. Indulgences saw a significant surge during the conflict. Selling indulgences to soldiers and civilians desperate for spiritual salvation brought in substantial revenue, showcasing the Church's ability to monetize fear and desperation. Religious influence over the war's outcomes ensured that the Church's political and economic interests were safeguarded. By backing winning factions and negotiating favorable terms, the Vatican secured its position and profits amidst the chaos. Chapter 7. Colonial Exploits in Africa: Evangelism and Economic Interests. The Catholic Church's role in African colonization was marked by a blend of evangelism and economic exploitation. Missionaries were not just spreading the faith but also accumulating wealth and resources. Land ownership was a significant aspect. The Church acquired vast tracts of land in colonized regions, often prime agricultural areas, enhancing its wealth and influence. Labor exploitation was rampant. Local populations were coerced into working for the Church, whether in agriculture, construction, or other labor-intensive activities. This exploitation was justified as part of their conversion process. Resource extraction became a profitable venture. The Church benefited from the extraction of valuable resources like rubber and minerals, which were abundant in African colonies. These resources were often extracted through the labor of local populations. Control over local trade networks allowed the Church to dominate regional economies. Missionaries and Church officials managed these networks, ensuring that profits flowed back to the Vatican. Chapter 8. The Opium Wars: Indirect Benefits from Conflict. The Opium Wars between China and Western powers had indirect yet significant financial benefits for the Vatican. These conflicts opened new avenues for missionary work and economic gain. Missionary expansion was one of the primary benefits. Post-war treaties allowed for increased missionary activity in China, leading to more conversions and, consequently, more donations and support for the Church. Property grants from Western powers in newly opened Chinese territories provided the Church with land and resources. These grants often included valuable urban and agricultural properties. Enhanced trade networks were another benefit. The opening of China to foreign trade improved the Church's access to Asian markets and goods, increasing its economic reach and influence. Cultural influence through increased conversions led to greater financial support from Chinese Christians. This support bolstered the Church's wealth and solidified its presence in Asia. Chapter 9. World War II: Controversial Alliances and Financial Gains. World War II was a period of profound moral and financial complexities for the Vatican. Allegations of profiteering and controversial alliances marked this dark chapter. Nazi gold was a significant controversy. The Vatican was accused of accepting and laundering gold stolen by the Nazis, enhancing its wealth while turning a blind eye to the source of these funds. Rat lines, or escape routes for war criminals, were facilitated by the Church. In exchange for safe passage, war criminals provided financial support to the Vatican, adding to its coffers. Property acquisition from confiscated Jewish properties also benefited the Church. As Jewish communities were displaced, their properties often ended up in Church hands, raising ethical and legal questions. War loans provided another financial stream. The Vatican Bank was implicated in financing wartime activities, profiting through interest and transactions that fueled the war machine. Chapter 10. Modern-day financial scandals. Legacy of wealth accumulation. Even in contemporary times, the Vatican's legacy of wealth accumulation has led to numerous financial scandals. These issues reflect the long-standing complexities of its financial practices. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, has been involved in multiple money laundering and corruption scandals. These controversies highlight the ongoing issues with transparency and ethics in the Church's financial dealings. Property investments continue to generate significant income for the Church. The Vatican owns vast properties around the world, and the management and revenue from these assets remain a critical part of its wealth. Donation mismanagement has also plagued the Church. Allegations of misusing and embezzling donations intended for charitable purposes have damaged the Vatican's reputation and raised questions about its financial integrity. Tax evasion has been another issue. The Vatican's tax-exempt status and financial secrecy have led to accusations of evading taxes and exploiting loopholes, further complicating its financial narrative. Now, the big question. Does this mean the Christian Church is to blame for all of these things? Well, the answer is a big fat no. Anything, no matter how good or how much hope it brings to people, can always be weaponized and used to exploit others. And if you want us to go into detail about this topic, let us know in the comments section below. And, as always, thanks for watching.